is a choice I leave to you.
The war against us all. This war in Iraq isn't the end, it's the beginning of wars to come, all around the world, at the whim of the neocons in the White House. This is the Bush doctrine come to life. War, war, and more war. War brought to you by the big corporate masters who run the show. This isn't just a war on Iraqis or Afghanis, or even Arabs or Muslims. It is ultimately a war on us all. That's because the billions and billions of dollars that are being spent on this war, the cost of tanks, rocketry, bullets, and yes, even salaries for the 125,000 plus troops, is money that will never be spent on education, on health care, on the reconstruction of crumbling public housing, or to train and place the millions of workers who have lost manufacturing jobs in the past 3 years alone. The war in Iraq is, in reality, a war against the nation's workers and the poor, who are getting less and less, while the big defense industries are making a killing, literally. What's next? Iran? Syria? North Korea? Venezuela? We've already seen the corporate media play megaphone to the White House to build and promote a war based on lies. War is utilized by the imperialists first and foremost to crush internal enemies. We're seeing the truth of his insight when we see the sad state of American education, the rush of seniors to buy affordable medications from the Canadians because American drugs are just too expensive, the threatened privatization of Social Security, and the wave of repression that comes with an increasingly militarized police. This is a war on all of us. And the struggle against war is really a struggle for a better life for the millions of folks who are in need here in this country. The fight against the war is really to fight for your own interests, not the false interests of the defense industries or the corporate media or the White House. Down with the wars for empire. From Death Row, this is Mumia Abu Jamal.
Let me just repeat. The reason why we insist that any process dealing with a notary presentment be done with an actual civil law notary is because that civil law notary can utilize noting and minuting to substantiate the record. And that record can then be implemented into any commercial system in any jurisdiction. So if you are not in fact engaged into the manufacturing of alcohol, firearms, and tobacco, you can easily remove your records off of the tax block. And you can apply for a full refund of what's available to you. But the refund will come to you in the form of an M3 asset. And when you have that M3 asset, you can utilize the Republic and your very own banking system to then move forward in commerce, not as a debtor, but as a creditor. But there is a lot of information that you must decide who you are in commerce to get to that level. So please understand that there are many processes to substantiate the record. The question is that, are you subject to the tax other than you volunteering for it? Because if you're not, then you're in your own way if that is a commercial issue. Now, you're going to need constitutional money in order for you to operate outside of the Trading with the Enemy Act. So keep listening, because if you listen long enough, you will learn something.
This is the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. Here's Robert Kiyosaki.
Hello. Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. And today we have a very, very special guest. But I think all of our guests are special. But this person is especially special because my definition of intelligence, if you agree with me, you're very intelligent. And everything I've listened to this guy saying, I'm going, man, he's intelligent. But he's also taken myself and Kim and our whole company to a whole nother depth of understanding of why the world is in such, I would say, dire straits right now. So our guest today is Andy Schekman, and I'm going to recommend two different videos with Jay Martin. And Jay Martin's the VRIC, Vancouver Resources Investment Convention. And Jay does an excellent job of interviewing you, and our whole company has been tasked with listening to part 1 and part 2 3 times each, because the amount of information packed into each one, everyone is different. So I'm going to recommend each of you do the same thing we're doing at Rich Dad, is listen to these 2 interviews with Andy Schekman and Jay Martin 3 times at least, because each time you listen to it, you'll gain a whole nother insight as to what is going on in the world economy. Any comments about Kim? It's really been transformational to listen to.
It's been transformational. So, and Andy Schekman, he's the president and founder of Miles Franklin Precious Metals, but has been in the financial industry since 1989. So he's got a lot of experience. But the cool thing for me is we've studied these videos as a company, and we discuss it, and we are looking at all points of view. So for me, and what we're going to discuss today is Andy, what you did is I've heard all the pieces and they were floating out in space and all these different pieces, but you brought all the pieces together in the puzzle. And I thank you for that. And this is going to be an incredible interview, and I'm really grateful to have you on the program.
Right. So the first one I'm going to recommend is Jay Martin's with the BRICS, BRICS, which stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And the second one is more about what you can do today. So we're going to recommend Jay Martin's videos twice. We'll recommend 2 different videos. Recommend listen to it 3 times. So Andy, welcome to the Rich Dad Show.
Welcome, Andy.
Oh, you guys, I'm so honored and grateful to be here. Flabbergasted, I guess you could say, would be maybe a halfway accurate adjective for the way that I have felt about the comments that you made. Just so grateful and appreciative to be here, and thank you for the kind words.
Oh, thank you. So can you let's just stay macro, keep it super simple. That's my new book series coming out called KISS, Keep It Super Simple, because that's what we do. So could you explain why the BRICS, BRICS, so crucial to the future of the world?
Yeah, I think it is incredibly crucial. It is a coalition of what amounts to pretty darn close to 90% of human population that is coalescing under a common theme, and that is, I think, to undermine the dominance of the West and the Western hegemony, and to do it properly with commodity backing. But if you don't mind, I'll take you down a pathway that I think will help connect the dots, and because I think it's important, as Kim said, there's a term, I think, if I get this right, if I remember back from high school, in literature called the fallacy of composition, which you look at a whole bunch of individual pieces, and in and of themselves, they don't have the significance that they do when they're all put together. And this is kind of what I started noticing really in 2017. And by 2019, I was convinced that I was on to something. And since then, in every YouTube that I have done, I have followed this thread. And what's interesting is that the thread keeps accelerating really to where we are today, where it's becoming painfully obvious, as far as I'm concerned, that this is the direction things are going. So, and you can interrupt me along the way if you have questions. But I'm going to take you down a path starting in 2017 and let yourself and your listeners decide for themselves if this is indeed correct, if I'm heading down the right path or not.
Let me just say, I think you nailed it so hard, and that's why there's 2 Jay Martin videos, 1 and 2. And my whole company has had to listen to part 1 3 times because there's so much information in there, but the pieces take a while to assemble.
They do.
And
they
then
do.
part 2 is I've listened to it twice now. I'm going to listen to it the third time. And what you're doing is you're putting the whole puzzle together. So please listen to both videos. So keep going, Andy.
So yeah, and I think that it's in and of itself, the individual pieces that I will talk about may not resonate, and in the end, I'll put it all together. I'll try to attempt to put it all together. But, I really noticed things starting to change in 2017, Robert and Kim. I noticed that, out of nowhere, the German Bundesbank made a very big deal about repatriating their gold in 2017. Now, this was at the tail end of what had amounted to a 6-year bear market in precious metals. And, in 2017 in particular, it was a rough year to own a precious metals company. You had Bitcoin really taking off. You had the equity markets doing fantastic. And gold was languishing, and central banks were selling it. It didn't make any sense to me. Why would the central banks be selling gold? I guess, well, maybe because it's been in the midst of a downdraft, and there's this new thing called Bitcoin that's really starting to take off. And maybe we were just moving away from the old way of doing things, and we're moving into a new reality. And well, the capitulation came to mind, and in 2017. 6 out of every 10 orders that we did were people selling. Most of them aggravated that Bitcoin, which was supposedly cut from the same cloth as gold, was accentuating itself. And why wasn't gold? So out of nowhere, the German Bundesbank, who had attempted to start repatriating their gold a year or two earlier from the Federal Reserve in New York, finally made a big deal about it publicly. And they said, hey, send us back all of our gold. Now, it's important to understand that really, since the end of World War II, the United States held most of the world's gold. And the reason, in a nutshell, that we did was that at the end of World War II, at Bretton Woods, when the dollar was anointed the world reserve currency, we made a promise to the world saying, hey, you can give us your gold because it's safe over here. You've gone through 2 world wars and it's safe over here. And I'll tell you what, we'll pay you $35 an ounce for your gold. And in turn, you take the proceeds of that and you buy our U.S. treasuries. And this will give you a return on a non-interest bearing asset, and it will be held safely. And we will always sell it back to you for $35 an ounce. Now, it had been that way for a very long time. And as I get down this pathway, we'll get to that moment that you and I were talking about briefly offline here, where that all changed. So Germany says to the West, give us back our gold. And within a few weeks of that happening, the Bank of Austria, the Bank of Hungary, the Bank of Turkey, the Czech National Bank, the Dutch National Bank, all of these banks followed suit, said the same thing, give us back our gold. And they said it not only to the New York Fed, but also to the Bank of England. We want to repatriate our gold. And this is really strange at this moment, because here we are in the midst of a downdraft in gold that is now going on 5-6 years, and the central banks are repatriating their gold.
Once again, this is 2017, so not that far away. Okay.
That's right, 2017. And now my interest is piqued in the speeches that I'm giving, like at the Sprott conference. I would cite that, hey, something's going on here. The central banks are increasing their gold holdings quietly and repatriating them, even when gold isn't doing much. In 2018, the following year, you guys, gold was those same groups that repatriated their gold bought more gold as a group than they did in the 60 years combined previously. So now something's really going on. These banks are repatriating their gold from the Fed and the Bank of England, and now they're buying copious amounts of it. Really interesting. In 2019, those numbers were up nearly 100% in terms of central bank purchases. It's really ramping up. Central banks not only have repatriated their gold, but now they're really buying it. And, it's still, this is perplexing until mile marker number 1. Now, before I tell you mile marker number 1, I'd like people watching this to ask themselves, how much of this do I really know? And ask yourselves, is the media that is supposedly telling us the truth really telling us what is important. Because I view some of the things I'm about to tell you as the most significant events, not only in my career, but ultimately in all of our lives. And I think maybe you'll understand what I'm getting at. Robert, you've seen this, and Kim, you've seen this, but for the sake of those who haven't, we'll start talking about these substantial, significant events that should really have been noticed by the public, but haven't. And I want people who are watching this to ask themselves, why? Why do I not know about this? Because they are very, very significant. Mile marker number 1, 2019, after the banks have just massively accumulated for the past 2.5 years and repatriated all of their gold, you have to wonder, were they clued into what I'm about to tell you? The Bank of International Settlements, which is the central banker's central bank in Basel, Switzerland, in April of 2019, quietly reclassified gold as the world's only other tier 1 reserve asset. Now, since 1944, at the end of the war, there had only been one tier 1 asset recognized by the central banks, and that was US dollars and treasuries. It's a riskless asset. And now, out of nowhere, they levy gold from tier 3, where only 50% was valued on the balance sheet, to tier 1, where it's as good as cash or equal to cash. Very, very quietly. And it makes you wonder, were the other central banks clued in by the BIS that, hey, get your gold home and start accumulating it? I happen to believe the answer is yes to that question. So here we are in 2019. Things are really starting to get interesting.
Wait, if I may add something, please. That was also the year the repo market crashed, September 17th, 2019.
And that's when people started waking up to what was going on.
And I'm going, what the heck is going on there? The repo market crashes. The last time that happened was 2008. So that's what I was watching. Okay.
Absolutely. And Zoltan Pozsar, one of my favorite commentators, who I guess I'd call the repo market expert, has been instrumental in a lot of my thinking, including calling where we are now Bretton Woods 3, which really fits in towards the end of what I'm going to talk about, a system dominated by commodities rather than by Western debt instruments. And that is where he says we are right now. He's the repo market expert. But yes, you can see, you know, my dad has this funny analogy for life. It's kind of like a roll of toilet paper. You don't notice it when it's spinning slowly, when it's a fresh roll, but over time it starts faster and you become more cognizant to the cardboard underneath. Well, that's kind of what's happening to me here in 2020. The roll's starting to spin faster, and I'm connecting these dots, the most significant of all the dots being the tier 1 asset, until we get a little bit further. So in 2020...
Wait, tell your dad I like his metaphor. It fits my mentality about toilet paper roll. It does fit.
I will. So in 2020, we start to see some more things that I'm connecting the dots to, one of which is mile marker number 2. Now, mile marker number 2, again, ask yourselves, people, have you heard of this? And if not, ask yourselves, why? Am I watching the wrong stuff? Am I reading the wrong stuff? And I would answer, yes, you probably are if you haven't heard about this. Now, this, what I'm about to tell you about, started a few years before, but really started to gain steam in 2020. And I look at this as maybe the most significant event in most of our lives to this point, and that is the foundation of the Chinese Belt Road Rail Initiative. Most people I talk to have not a clue what that is. And it's incredibly impactful and incredibly significant on the West and the West's future, because what it is the most ambitious infrastructure project ever attempted in human history. It is connecting Asia and Africa, parts of Europe, and even parts of South America, the old Silk Road plus, through maritime channels, bridges, railways, roads, and this infrastructure program will only be patrolled by military and commerce. It is the Panama Canal on steroids. But what people need to understand is just this particular little infrastructure represents over 75% of human population and 45% of GDP before global GDP, even before it's industrialized. And I owe a debt of gratitude to your buddy, George Gammon, who woke me up to this. I'll never forget. I was living in Minnesota at the time, where I spent first 50 years of my life in the middle of winter, 2020, going on a walk, and blown away when he starts talking about this. And I remember him saying 75% of human population, 45% of GDP. And this blew my mind. Start following it a little bit further and realize just how significant this really is. The contracts and the settlement on the new Belt Road is predominantly being settled in the new Chinese digital yuan. This is a very, very, very big deal, because for the last 3 years, the digital yuan has successfully transacted upwards ends of $20 billion in trades and in settlements, even using it at the Winter Olympics. And I would like to call this a beta test. We'll get back to that as we progress, but really big deal, where 75% of human population is beginning to be indoctrinated into a new currency, into a new settlement system. This ambitious infrastructure project is void of American participation and void of dollar settlement, almost exclusively and entirely.
So I'll keep it simple here.
Stop me anytime, yes.
Yeah. This is like Marco Polo and the Silk Road. I mean, this is how significant this is what Marco Polo, I guess he traveled from Italy all the way to China, and then he started connecting the dots. Well, the Belt and Road, or this project that the Chinese are undertaking using their CBDC, central bank digital currency, and asset-backed digital, is going to make 75% of the world population switch to Chinese.
That's right. And wait till I get to what's happened with it here when I get to 2022. It's more significant. Some of these things I didn't talk about on Jay's show because of time constraints, but you'll see when we get to 2022, it's becoming right in your face obvious if you are looking. So you're right. And this is a big deal. And this is the beginning of the infrastructure, the external and internal infrastructure that is, I think, laying the foundation for massive de-dollarization. But we'll get there in a moment. Further things start to happen in 2020 that really start to make me say, hey, I'm on to something here, no question about it. Now I'm blasting this out on every single interview I do, 3-4 a week, every one of them. And they're out there for posterity's sake. People can go back and see that I'm not just coming up with this. I have been following this like a bloodhound on the scent of something significant for a few years now. So out of nowhere, the International Monetary Fund, well, this is a group of nearly 200 countries that was established at Bretton Woods, says to the world, hey, we want a new Bretton Woods. Well, what does that mean? That means that 200 countries from around the world want a new standard that isn't what the original Bretton Woods standard is, which is the US dollar is the world reserve currency. It said right on their website, we're requesting a new Bretton Woods moment, whatever the heck that means. But that really started to make me think, geez, this is bigger than even I had thought. When you have 200 countries from around the world on top of the Belt Road Initiative, on top of gold being reclassified Tier 1, on top of all the central banks repatriating their gold, now the IMF wants a new standard. So now I'm convinced something's going on. And then it gets even a little bit deeper than that. Now, of course, in 2020, the central banks are still massively accumulating gold. I mean, copiously accumulating it, especially Russia and China and India and the members of the BRICS. The RICS and BRICS are the big ones, Russia, China, India, South Africa. But they're continuing to buy it. But then we see something on the COMEX market, the commodity exchange here in the United States, that came out of nowhere. And without getting too deep, let's just say that every week the COMEX market, the commodity exchange, publishes a report. And that report is called the Commitment of Traders report. And the Commitment of Traders report that I have been following my whole career shows the positioning, long or short, of the largest traders on the exchange. And typically, it's only been commercial banks, speculators, which are the hedge funds. And if one goes long, the other goes short, and vice versa. It's a zero-sum game, so to speak. where the managed money speculating hedge funds will go long, the commercial banks will go short, and vice versa. And that's all that was ever on the Commitment of Traders report until 2020. Out of nowhere, there is a new list of reportables on the Commitment of Traders called the Others. What the heck are the Others? They're family offices and sovereign wealth funds. I would call them the most informed, well-funded private traders on the planet.
That's so please, what he just said, it's family offices and sovereign wealth funds. See, what Kim and I run is a family office. We're not on the stock exchange, we're not anything like that. We're a privately owned family office that does our own trading for us. That is a major shift, and it goes to sovereign wealth funds, which is getting away from the big banks and all this.
100%. And most of the trading these folks would do on the COMEX was done on something called the Globex, which is, it gives them a little bit more privacy and anonymity. So no one really knows who the heck they are. But what they did in 2020 was now following part and parcel with what the central banks were doing. They were taking metal off of the exchanges. Now, at this point, to this point in my career, less than 1% of COMEX contracts ever stood for delivery. The COMEX was originally built to offset risk, where if I own 1,000 ounces of gold in my warehouse, I'll sell 1,000 ounces on paper on COMEX. So if the price in my warehouse drops by $100, I'm not down $100,000 because what I sold short on COMEX goes up, commensurate. It allows me to offset my risk, to be market neutral, or a farmer who plants a field of grain in April can sell the future production to the baker in October to make bread. He wants the wheat. The farmer doesn't have to go the whole growing season with the uncertainty of the weather and the crop and all that stuff. It's just a way to offset risk by people who deal in commodities. Well, it's turned into a casino for sure. But what happened in 2020 was this group, the Others, started to drain the market, the COMEX market of physical supply. When no one ever took possession, they took off in 1 year in 2020 more silver than we've seen in a typical decade being removed, and more gold that year than the Bank of Japan has in its official holdings. So now you have the most private, the most well-funded, well-informed private investors doing the exact same thing that the commercial banks and the central banks have been doing, and that is massively accumulating metal and taking possession of it.
And that was my question. And they're taking possession. They're not just buying it. They're taking possession. Okay.
Right.
Yeah,
So
when we get to 2022, we'll see just how much they're really doing. I'm sorry, Robert?
But this is the point where Kim and I take possession. You know, we don't leave it in those fake ETFs and stuff.
Well, or on the COMEX exchange in 1,000-ounce silver bars or 100-ounce gold bars.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big deal. You know, Doug Casey has always made, he has a lot of one-liners and comments that I've always got a lot out of. One of them is that gold and silver are the only assets on the planet that are not simultaneously someone else's liability. So in a world where counterparty risk could become accentuated or come into play, the removal of counterparty risk by taking possession of this metal is very illuminating. So here we are in 2020, and all of a sudden now, you know, you see all of these things that are happening. The IMF asking for a new system, gold being reclassified tier 1, the central banks repatriating their gold. All of these things are happening. The banks copiously buying gold, and nobody knows about any of it. 2021 comes around and we see Russia and Turkey and India and Poland and China and Kazakhstan and Hungary and Thailand and Japan and Brazil and the Czech Republic and Turkey. They're all buying gold. No one's talking about it. Why? I don't get it. I mean, you got half of the world's central banks copiously accumulating gold and nobody is talking about it. I watched Fox News. Where is it? Sorry?
Please, what Andy's saying, they're not just buying it. They're taking delivery of it. Right. And that is a very, 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 very big difference. So we come back, I want to make sure, because we need to take a break, but we have some incredible markers, you know, like what happened when the BIS, Bank of International Settlements out of Basel, elevated gold to a tier 1. And most people have never heard about that. And we're going to go into more and more of this, but it's now that people are taking physical delivery of it, and their family offices and sovereign wealth funds. And what Andy says, these are the smartest guys on earth, not the banks. So we come back, we'll be continuing with Andy Schekman.
Robert's been warning us for years, time after time, his golden rule: invest in real assets. That's how he didn't just survive the last period of catastrophic inflation, he thrived, turning his first property into a real estate empire of over 7,000 units. But with history possibly repeating itself, home purchasing sentiment is at a 10-year low, and we could be on the verge of another historic crash. Combined with rising inflation, the landing may be even harder than last time. But according to BlackRock CEO Larry Fink, the largest asset manager in the world, there's one real asset that investors need to know about because of its resilience during times like these. Fink calls it the new gold. He's talking about contemporary art. It makes sense. The last time inflation was this high, contemporary art appreciated 33% annually on average, more than gold and real estate in the same period. And now it can be part of your portfolio for a fraction of what billionaires like Fink pay, all thanks to Masterworks. It's the new tech platform and lets you invest in shares of paintings by Warhol, Picasso, and Banksy. And the result so far has been incredible, with 6 paintings sold for an average net return of 29% to the investors. No wonder their over 500,000 users have invested more than $500 million on Masterworks. And here's the best part. You can skip the wait list and try Masterworks for free by going to masterworks.art/richdad. That's masterworks.art/richdad. See important disclosures at masterworks.com/CD. Hey everyone, it's Sarah at the Rich Dad Radio Show. Let me tell you, good sleep is the ultimate game changer, and the 8 Sleep Pod is the ultimate sleep machine. I live in Arizona. It's over 100 degrees today, and it's only expected to get hotter throughout the week. And the Pod is the only sleep technology that dynamically cools and heats each side of the bed to maintain the optimal sleeping temperature for what your body needs. With the Pod, you can start sleeping as cool as 55 degrees Fahrenheit or as hot as 110 degrees Fahrenheit. And clinical data shows that 8 Sleep users experience up to 19% increase in recovery, up to 32% improvement in sleep quality, and up to 34% more deep sleep. And 8 Sleep recently just launched the next generation of the Pod. The new Pod 3 enables more accurate sleep and health tracking with double the amount of sensors, delivering you the best sleep experience on Earth. And all you need to do is go to 8sleep.com/richdad to start sleeping cool this summer and save up to $150 on the Pod. 8 Sleep currently ships within the USA, Canada, the UK, select countries in the EU, and Australia.
Feeling powerless over current events and your financial future? Financial freedom is your freedom. Robert Kiyosaki is the best-selling author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Over 40 million people have taken Robert's advice. Now it's your turn. Attend Robert's free virtual wealth building event. Claim your free access now at richdadfree.com. Don't wait, access is limited. Go to richdadfree.com. That's richdadfree.com.
Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. And once again, I think this is the most important. All our shows are important, but none more important than this, because our guest today is Andy Schekman. He's president and founder of Miles Franklin Precious Metals. And my definition of intelligence, if you agree with me, you're intelligent. And he's one of the first people that agree with me 100% all the way. But I want to tell a joke before I go on. He's talking about the difference between buying what I call fake gold, and fake gold's an ETF, like what Tony Robbins and all those guys promote. I don't like fake. I like real. I don't want paper. I don't want futures contracts. I want the real stuff. So we take delivery of it. Now, what we don't tell people is where do we deliver it to? And the reason for that, Andy, I was at this conference, and this guy stood up. Of course, he's an attorney because, you know, they're not the brightest guys on earth. He stands up there and says, yeah, I take delivery of all my gold, and they keep it at my house. And this other guy stood up and said to him, well, why don't you just give us your address so we can steal it from you, you idiot? So I want to let you know, when you take delivery, it doesn't mean keep it at your house. You've got to find somebody else. Is that correct, Kim?
That's definitely correct. I don't want anybody knocking at my door, but I'm excited, Andy, to continue on with this timeline, because you've already given us that, you know, I never knew that in 2017 or 2019 that that the BIS made gold tier 1. I never knew that until I watched your video. I heard about the Chinese Belt and Road, but I didn't realize the impact that it had. So then these are just 2, and I know you've got a lot more. So let's keep going. We're
Great.
up to 20. Yep.
Great, absolutely. And you're right. The reclassification gold tier 1 is huge. You know, just to touch on that for 1 second, everyone in my industry always thought that if anything ever rose to the level of dollar prominence, it would be something like a special drawing rights from the IMF. And the question is, why did they make gold tier 1? I want people to keep that in the back of their mind. Why is gold tier 1? Maybe it makes a little more sense why the central banks are accumulating and taking possession of the gold because of its riskless elevated tier 1 status. So anyways, 2021 comes around, and now I'm going to go back to what we talked about with the dollar being the world reserve currency. So the dollar was backed by gold as far as governments were concerned. We promised that any of the gold that we're holding for you, you can exchange your dollars, or even just the dollars that you own. You can exchange them for gold at a fixed rate of $35 whenever you want. So now we're going to get something a little closer to you, Robert, and that was towards the end of the Vietnam War. I've heard a lot of your podcasts where you talk about your experiences there, and in the end, towards the end of the Vietnam War, President de Gaulle from France realized that we were issuing more dollars and treasuries to fund the war than we had gold backing these promises. So he sent warships filled with dollars to New York Harbor and said to, President Nixon, we want our gold back for these dollars. And we gave it to him, and he bled down a very large portion of the gold held at the U.S. Treasury. And at that moment, Nixon said, okay, August of 1971, that's it. Windows closed temporarily, although it's never opened back up. So it's been a long temporary. But we went back on our promise to the world. And it was at that moment that the dollar was backed by nothing. And so the question that I ask the people out there, and it's amazing how few people know the answer to this question, is what has made the dollar the world reserve currency ever since? And you get a myriad of answers, usually centered around our military, or we have the biggest and most robust economy, or whatever. And I guess you could argue some of that is true. But what has made the dollar the world reserve currency was that 3 years later, Henry Kissinger was dispatched to Saudi Arabia. And he made a promise to the Saudis. He said, how about this? We will back you. Well, let's call it a joint military cooperation agreement. And we will stand behind you. We'll provide you munitions and support. No one will ever mess with the Saudi kingdom. But for that, OPEC is going to value dollar or oil in dollars globally. Okay, they said, fine. And so since 1974, every single country on the planet has had to own, virtually every country has had to own dollars in order to buy oil. And it has created this synthetic demand for the dollar called the petrodollar and made the dollar the world reserve currency. If you want to power your country, you must own dollars. It is the protection of the Saudi kingdom, and by default, the relationship with OPEC that has enabled the dollar to be the world reserve since 1974, because 3 years prior, the link to gold was severed. The dollar was at that point fiat, backed by nothing. And obviously, we all know the history. Since that point, the dollar's lost over 90% of its value. But that's for a discussion for a different day. And so,
and that's why Ma was saying, that's why I say savers are losers. Why would you save dollars when inflation's running at about 16%? They reported it at 8%, but it's really at 16%. So you're going negative 16 on your money? Why would you save dollars? But these idiots, you got to save money, get out of debt. I'm going, wait a minute. The dollar is created via debt. Don't you get that? And the only way they pay it back is via your taxes. Idiot. Can't you get that? And so that's how the Rich Dad Company was founded, Andy, and I'm not the most popular guy with Wall Street right now. But anyway, I'm glad you're saying what you're saying. One more thing is what happened in 1974 was ERISA was passed. ERISA's Income Retirement Security Exchange, something like 401k IRAs. Also in 1974, the gold became legal for Americans to own. So 74 was a very big year. So I had all this gold I was smuggling in from Hong Kong. I could now own it legally. And then, exactly as I said, Kissinger promises the Saudis will protect you as long as everybody in the world must buy oil in dollars. So it became the petrodollar, no longer a gold-backed dollar. Am I correct on that?
100%. Exactly. And that's perfect. That's exactly right. And then comes mile marker number 3. And no one knows this. And
I know.
It just absolutely baffles me that nobody knows this one. And I would say this marker is way more significant probably than the 2 preceding. And the fact that our media doesn't say anything about it, I find it to be deplorable. And, I guess when you realize that every newspaper, radio station, television station, magazine in the United States is owned by 4 companies, there is no fair and balance. There is no, we're being fed the wrong information, because this next moment, I think, sets the stage for everything that's going to happen in this country moving forward. And that is what happened the day that we left Afghanistan. Now, I don't have to tell you, as being a former Marine, that what happened when we left Afghanistan, to me as an American patriot, and I am a patriot, and I love this country, and I feel blessed to be here and for the opportunities this country has afforded me and my family. And look, we come from nothing. When we started this company, we come from nothing. My father's middle name is Miles. His best friend's middle name is Franklin. We borrowed $60,000 from his friend to start a company, and we just eclipsed $7 billion in sales. We are the American dream. I love this country, but I will tell you that as an American patriot, I was embarrassed to almost call myself an American the day we left Afghanistan, leaving behind enemy lines, something that was something we never would have done in the country I grew up in. You would never leave servicemen and women behind enemy lines. You would never leave the people who trusted you with their lives, the freedom fighters, behind enemy lines and give their biometrics to the Taliban. And I think there is no coincidence to the announcement of this mile marker number 3, because we embarrassed ourselves on a massive scale with people hanging from a transport plane as the last plane out of Afghanistan is going, knowing we have Americans that are still there today. It's inexcusable. And it's deplorable. And I think it, in many ways, changed the way the world looks at the United States, or at least our leadership, shall we say. And there's no coincidence to the timing of this massive announcement. Now, once again, what makes the dollar world reserve? Oh, yeah, it's the protection of the Saudi kingdom. What happened the day after we left Afghanistan? Russia and Saudi Arabia announced a joint military cooperation agreement. What? Are you kidding me? What? Russia is now protecting Saudi Arabia? And the day after that, guess who did it again? Nigeria makes the same announcement that Nigeria and Russia are now Russia is protecting Nigeria through a joint military cooperation agreement. They're maybe the 5th or 6th largest OPEC producing country, and we know what Saudi Arabia is. Subsequently, we've already seen that Nigeria is selling their oil to China right now for yuan-denominated bond that is immediately convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. It's called the Petro-Yuan bond. And because it is immediately convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange, this is how countries like Iran sidestep our sanctions. They'll sell their oil to the Chinese in the Petro-Yuan bond, and they can immediately convert it to gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange into kilo bars and take possession of it. This is why the Shanghai Gold Exchange has delivered close to 100 times more gold than we have, the COMEX, which sets the price, because these countries are doing just that. And guess who else is doing it? Saudi Arabia. So you have the linchpin of the dollar hegemony, the Saudis, and now Nigeria, 2 of the 13 OPEC member countries, selling their oil already to China, both being protected by Russia. Nigeria, part of the Belt Road Initiative, being protected by China. They're selling their oil in something other than dollars. This is a huge deal. Of course, we're not talking about it, but it is a massive deal. Massive.
So let me remind people, okay, Jay Martin from the VRIC, Vancouver Real Estate Investment Conference, interviews Andy Schectman in 2 parts. Part 1 is on the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. If you read my books, I've been covering these guys for a long time, watching them, because I travel throughout the world. I've seen what the Chinese are doing all over Africa. I cannot believe they have whole compounds, of Chinese people. I was in Cameroon, and they have these huge trenching machines dropping fiber optic cable all the way across Africa. And what are we doing? Nothing. We have Kamala Harris not even going to the frickin' border, and she's the border czar. I mean, oh my God. And then when Andy talked about how when they abandoned Afghanistan, you forget that I was there in Vietnam when they abandoned us in 1975. And I still remember, Andy, I'm walking through the village. This is before we declared we quit, before we quit Vietnam. I was watching the Vietnamese scurrying around. I said, now they were buying gold leaf. That gold leaf they rub on stuff? They were buying gold leaf like crazy. And I'm going, and Americans, as I write about, we don't know what gold is because it was illegal for us to own gold. So I'm watching these Vietnamese buy all this gold leaf. And I asked my staff sergeant, his name was Jackson, he was one of the smartest guys I met. I say, Jack, why are they buying gold? He says, they're going to run. They know Americans abandoned us. They're going to run. They're going to get out of this country as fast as they can. And during my era, that was the Vietnamese boat people and all that. They were climbing on. They were ready to get out of that country. And then one of the more famous pictures is the picture of a CIA Air America helicopter on top of the U.S. Embassy. And all these Vietnamese people are running up there, and they're punching them, trying to keep them out of there. And then they have us on our aircraft carriers, and we're dumping our helicopters over the side because they got too many of the Vietnamese helicopters running. They were flying to our carriers. And I was out there watching all this stuff going, holy mackerel. And then in 74, exactly as you said, that's when the ERISA came out, the 401k, and going, what the heck is going on? And the petrodollar, and then they say, oh, by the way, you can now own gold legally. I'm going, so I've been watching all this. So when your podcast came out with Jay Martin, I'm recommending everybody listen to it 3 times, because what you're saying is a massive
composition,
concentrated knowledge, drop.
Very much. And look, and as we go through where we are now in 2022, and we get to Klaus Schwab, I'm going to try to put the pieces together and let you make up your minds for your decision for yourself. It is a lot of these pieces